Welcome to today's conversation, celebrating the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Join the conversation live from the campus of Sacred Heart University with your host from SHU Multicultural Affairs, Robert Johnson.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Robert Johnson. I'm the Director of Multicultural Affairs. Today we're here to celebrate the life of Dr. Martin Luther King. We want to start today's event off with a prayer from Reverend Sarah.
Good afternoon. My name is Reverend Sarah Smith. I'm the Protestant chaplain here at Sacred Heart University, and I welcome you to this wonderful program today where we seek to honor and learn from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy. Let us begin where we always should begin, with a word of prayer. However you pray, however you understand God, let us join together in a time to reflect and ground ourselves in all that is good. Please pray with me. O Holy One, whom we call upon by many different names and different understandings, we give you thanks for the life and the work of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that we honor today. Dr. King was truly one of your prophets, O God, mighty in word and deed, and we owe much to his vision and to his sacrifice. And yet, O God, we do not do justice to Dr. King's dream of justice if we merely recite his words and enjoy a day off in his name. For we confess that the issues that Dr. King stood against, racial justice and economic justice, remain elusive. And we here in these United States are failing to fully realize either still 50 years later. O Creator who made each of us, every shade of color, every dialect, every culture, who made us in your image and calls each of us very good. May we let Dr. King's vision comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable today. May we recommit our lives and our community here at Sacred Heart University to do the hard work of cleaning out the wounds of racism anywhere and everywhere it lives within our hearts or our institution. May we who are of whiter hues listen, learn, own our privilege and share it, and seek ways to repair the damage and pain which our Black and brown sisters and brothers still endure. May we who are of darker hues not settle for less than what is deserved: equality, opportunity, respect, dignity. May we all seek ways, small and large, to build the beloved community which undergirded everything Dr. King stood for. So, O Holy One, we give you thanks for Martin Luther King, and may we truly bring him and you, the God he served, honor by how we live and how we work to bend the moral arc of the universe toward justice. And we pray this in your strong and holy name. Amen.
Thank you so much for that prayer, Reverend Sarah. Definitely much needed in this time. So now I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Diversity Officer, Julie Lawrence.
Hi, everyone. I am Julie Lawrence, Chief Diversity Officer at Sacred Heart University, and welcome to our event celebrating the life of Martin Luther King. This is an exciting time, and we're very happy that you're here. We also have Dr. Patillo here, and we have a very special guest, our own Board of Trustee member and a former alum, Dr. Eric Wood. Dr. Eric Wood is Vice President and Director of Athletics for Louisiana Tech University. He has over 20 years of successful experience in athletics and higher education administration, and over 11 years of executive staff leadership as well. Dr. Wood was a 2019 Next Up honoree presented by the College of Athletic Directors for senior level administrators. He earned his Doctor of Education degree in Sports Management from the University of Arkansas. In 2016, his Master of Education in Counseling and Guidance Services from Clemson in 2000, and he earned a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from Sacred Heart University in 1998, where he graduated cum laude. We're glad you're here, Dr. Eric, and we look forward to chatting with you. I'll turn it over to Dr. Patillo.
Welcome. Today, this community pauses and reflects on a man who lived his beliefs and was in the service of others. He was a man of deep faith, committed to nonviolence, focused on the dignity and worth of every woman, man, and regardless of color, stature, or creed. He was, and is still indeed, a man for others. Today we pause, as we have recently been confronted by the bigotry, intolerance, and hatred. We pause to be reminded that Dr. King would not permit us to deteriorate, responding likewise to such indignities. His faith, commitment to nonviolence, and belief in the goodness of people would have urged us to stand tall and proudly in the face of such horrific and hostile behaviors. In tribute to Dr. King, the lyrics of the song, "Am I My Brother's Keeper?" express our obligation in today's spirit best. And I read, "As long as people hungry, as long as thirst, and ignorance and illness and warfare do their worst, as long as there's injustice in any of God's land, I am my brother's keeper. I dare not wash my hands." Dr. King always reminded us of our obligation to serve and leave no one behind. Friend or foe, each of us are God's children, deserving of our outstretched hand. So today, we pause to acknowledge Dr. King's wisdom and courage. We pause to reflect if we have the strength to respond nonviolently as he so bravely did. We pause to ask ourselves if we have been irresponsibly silent these past few months. Reflect on Dr. King's words for us today. We have learned to fly in the air like the birds. We've learned to swim in the seas like fish. And yet, we haven't learned to walk the earth as brothers and sisters. My friends, do we have the courage to dream boldly as our brother Martin did?
Thank you, President Patillo. That was amazing. So now I'm going to turn it over to our guest, Dr. Eric Wood.
Robert, thank you. Dr. Patillo, thank you to all of the Sacred Heart University administrators, staff, student athletes, faculty, my fellow Board of Trustees members that may be participating today. I have to tell you that I'm extremely humbled and honored. I shared during my interview process for the Board of Trustees that this is a full circle moment, a full circle opportunity in the spirit of MLK to return to the place that gave me an opportunity to further my education, complete my degree, and do something different than the statistics may have suggested where I may land. If I may briefly just share for those of you that may not know the background, which is probably most of you, I attended Sacred Heart University from 1994 to 1998. I'm originally from the Bronx in New York City. My father is African American, my mother's Puerto Rican, and my mother has a high school diploma. I have two older half brothers, but I'm the first in that group to go to college. And I'll tell you that when Sacred Heart gave me the opportunity and looked at me as a whole candidate, I applied to other schools that were focused. And I'll tell you that I was embarrassed then, but I'm not now, that I was a 770 SAT student. But Sacred Heart saw the whole picture in me, my high school GPA, my leadership opportunities that I had taken advantage of, my community service, my written statement, just the whole package. I'm sure diversity was included in that. And they gave me an opportunity. And so today, this is a full circle moment for me to come back and be a part of the Board of Trustees at the place that gave me an opportunity that absolutely changed my life. You've heard that my degrees, my undergraduate degree is in psychology. My master's is in counseling and guidance. And a lot of that, I came to Sacred Heart undecided, and through the guidance of faculty and counselors and colleagues and my RA and Kim Souza Peoples and Denise Sutphin and Larry Wilk, all of these people that were a part of my growth and development, allowed me to navigate where I wanted to be and how I was going to make a difference and what passions I had, and really brought that out and gave me the opportunity to move on. I chose to do this work and remain in higher education. I've worked in higher education and college athletics, as Julie mentioned in the introduction, for this is year 22. And what I realized was that I had a passion, and I absolutely believe in the power of higher education. But I also believe in the power of sport. And so I hope that the students that are on here are not chasing something that mom and dad want them to chase. As far as a degree, Sacred Heart helped me find my passions, and I realized that I get to live every day my dream because of the people that have come before me. I get to stand on their shoulders, but I get to serve as the vice president and athletics director now at Louisiana Tech, where I can live between my two passions of education and the power of sport. I get to work right at the intersection of my passions, and I look forward to a conversation today, and hoping that people leave here reminded of Dr. King and his life and legacy, and whatever portion of my story resonates with you, to pursue your passion and make an impact on this world. So, Robert, I'll let you. I'll share that the way that I returned and got more involved now with Sacred Heart really happened over the summer. I obviously, Dr. Patillo was not the president during my tenure as a student and a student athlete at Sacred Heart University. I didn't know him, but watching from afar him take a stance on bigotry and hatred, and as the leader of the institution, not standing for it, knowing he was going to be criticized by many within the family and certainly those outside of the family, I said, I want to follow that guy, and I want to be a part of that leadership team. And so that alone, probably embarrassingly enough, I should have been engaged more along, but that alone said it's time to re-engage. And it happened over the summer, obviously during the social justice movement that continues on now. But I couldn't be more proud to be a Sacred Heart alum, to be serving on the board of trustees, to have Dr. Patillo as our president, and to participate today in as transparent as I can be of a conversation on the impact that Dr. King has had on my life, and what I can share with our student athletes and faculty and staff.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wood. Myself also coming from a similar situation and circumstance, and now see you in the position that you're in, and like you said, re-engaging and continuing the conversation. It's important for me to see that because representation matters, right? And today is going to be really a conversation. I don't want this to be too scripted. I want people to know that we're all human here, and that our journeys are so important, and that you'll meet people along the way in your development. So I'm going to ask a couple questions. So the first question that I do want to ask, it's not super personal, but it's what's your favorite Martin Luther King quote and or story that motivates you today to continue his sacrifice?
Yeah, so I have to be honest with you. Every year, we celebrate the life and legacy, and in full transparency, hopefully there's no judgment. To Reverend Sarah's point, in my early adulthood life, it was a day off. It was a day off, and social media wasn't around then during the 94 to 98 days, and shortly after, clearly after that, it's more recent. But even then, I was certainly copying and pasting quotes and just making sure that I acknowledged it. It was definitely a day off, though, rather than a day on. And here I am, just turned 44 years old. Wish I was more engaged. Wish I really dug in some more. But here's the deal. I'll share a quote, but I wanted today to be more about not what we just put on Instagram and Twitter the other day, right? I don't want to necessarily share and talk about just the Martin Luther King that would turn the other cheek, right? Let's be honest here in that if he were alive today, um, he probably would be vilified, right? He'd be vilified. He'd be speaking up. He'd be front and center. Um, he'd be challenging just leaders and challenging our community, and it wouldn't be the loving figure that we all look back on today. And so the one that I'll share, just to not do the regular quotes, is it would be cruel just to say to a bootless man that he ought to pull himself up by his own bootstraps. Right. So I love many of them. If I look back on my social media, I'm sure I've cut and pasted a bunch of them. But that one, particularly right now, while the country is so divided, that one is the one that resonates with me the most. And because it's an understanding and serving of other people, understanding where they are, understanding, to Reverend Sarah's point earlier. I mean, she said so many of the things that I'll probably reiterate at this point, but it's just understanding our own privilege, understanding my privilege as a light-skinned African American and Latino, understanding the privilege I have as a male. It's putting yourself in someone else's and not just saying, well, I did it, I can do it, I've lifted myself. I mean, really not understanding the story and the origin of that person's story. And so for today's conversation, sure, I made sure I wrote down that one was my favorite, but I hope that today we talk about the real conversations, and who Dr. Martin Luther King would have been, and how he would have been viewed in today's society as we work through this social justice movement. So, Robert, I'll suggest this. We could all, if we took the time to work through them, we'd all have a different quotes that would be our favorite. At the end of the day, I believe it all comes down to, as I reflected on it, it's a Galatians 6:9. It's a Galatians 6:9. It says, "Do not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." If I had to summarize all of Dr. King's quotes, or that I've seen on social media, at the end of the day, it's about understanding our privilege, continuing to serve even when it's hard, and not giving up, knowing that we are continuing, even if we don't see it in our lifetime, we will have planted the seeds, and the community will reap that harvest. So I'll stop there for now.
I love that answer, and I love the transparency that that you've offered to the community, in showing that it's that Dr. King isn't just this delightful figure that we can look back on, right? How would he perceive today's climate right now? And with that being said, I want to move on to our next question. And asking, like, what were some of the obstacles that you faced as a student of color here at Sacred Heart, and kind of give the community a little bit more perspective, especially the students that I work with in the Multicultural Center, a little bit of perspective. What were some of the obstacles that you faced as a student of color, if and share a story too, maybe, if you'd like.
Well, again, as a kid from the Bronx, Sacred Heart provided me an opportunity to be, maybe this is cliche, but far enough from home where I wasn't in New York anymore, but far enough away where mom couldn't just pop up. But I recall coming to Sacred Heart thinking, I'm out of the city, I'm in Fairfield, that's a safe neighborhood. I want to live there. This will be unlike living in the Bronx. And I was fortunate to come to Sacred Heart, and I want to say three or four guys from high school. I went to Mount St. Michael High School in the Bronx. And so I had a little bit of a community. I think, having been a student athlete and reporting for football camp in August of '94, prior to school starting, you have that built-in community there. But I think what we noticed early on, was that we had this community of people that were from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, some parts of Connecticut, but we had this built in a community of people that could relate to us, that like the foods we like, that listen to the music we like, that wore their clothes the way we liked it, enjoyed the things that we like to do, but we didn't honestly see that on campus yet. And I'm thankful by the time we left, it had improved. But that was a shocker to me. We honestly felt like, and I'm saying we, the guys that I came from high school with, and then obviously on the team, some of my black and brown, teammates. I think we realized that it didn't appear as if there were events for us. Um, and so what we ended up doing was we had all come to school thinking we were going to join in this fraternity, and it was going to be the scenario and the fraternities that we saw in the movies, and we were going to pledge, and it was going to be this whole college experience. And quite honestly, when we arrived in '94, we didn't see it. Now, this is my recollection. So I love all of the staff and administrators that were there at the time when we enrolled, but we didn't see that. All of the fraternities and sororities were white, it appeared to us. And so we said, what can we do? How do you start this? And thankfully there was a sophomore, that was living we were the first residents to live in West Hall. And he was able to explain, he was the president of, I think it was Umoja or a Caribbean club, but he said, hey, you can always start something. And we thought, oh, how difficult is this going to be? But we didn't see anything that was a body, a group, a registered student organization that looked like us. We didn't think they wanted to do the things that we wanted to do. And so in the common area of West Hall, a bunch of us got together and said, what would we want to be a part of? And that was, doing the work that entire fall of '94. We ultimately started Omega Phi Kappa Multicultural Fraternity very intentionally. It was never intended to be an all Black fraternity. It was never intended to be Latino. It was never meant to exclude whites. We wanted to make sure that it was a melting pot, so that we had a place and people that looked like us, that had similar interests. And I'll tell you what, when I went in front of that Greek council and presented our ideas, I was confronted with, are you trying to create a gang? And I was floored. I was floored by the council of students that perceived us trying to create a multicultural organization with like interests. I was met with, are you trying to create a gang? And I don't know, maybe living in the most diverse city in America, this was the first time I was really confronted I started college at 17 years old. I didn't turn 18 until the spring semester in January. I'm 17 years old, and this is the first time I met with, where did you deduce that? Where did you get that from? And us saying we would like to create a multicultural fraternity that reflects more of us, and the philanthropies that existed at the time. They were all special. They were all important, but we had a desire to go into the inner city of Bridgeport and encourage the youth that looked like us to pursue higher education. We knew it was going to be a game changer for us, and there wasn't an organization that had that philanthropy, and we wanted to start that as well. So not only a group of people that looked like us and maybe had similar interests in food and music and things to do, but also our philanthropy was going to be different, because many of us had come from inner cities, and we knew what higher education could do. And so that became our philanthropy. But Robert, I was blown away at the first time, experiencing that. And to be honest with you, never thought. There may be different perceptions of Omega Phi Kappa right now over the last 25 years. Hopefully the reputation is great, but the important point here is that instead of just living in the space and not doing anything about it, we created it. Even in the sense of adversity, we created that. And to be honest with you, I never thought it would last beyond our class of '98. If it did, it was awesome. But we did that to maximize our student experience and make life a little more normal on a predominantly white campus. And I'll tell you what, it changed our lives. We probably Zoom or on a group text with 25 to 30 of those guys, once a month. And they were lifelong friendships, relationships. We were in each other's weddings. And so, we survived. and through that, we made a commitment, Robert, that everybody in that committee, in that fraternity, would serve on another organization. Number one, so that our voices and our interests were represented, and number two, because we were already starting off behind the eight ball with the perception that we were creating a gang. That's verbatim. I'm not creating that language or using hyperbole, right? That was the language that was used. And so we wanted to make sure that we were represented on different groups, our interests. We worked with Denise and Larry and Kim Souza people at the time to make sure that we brought musical acts that, may have represented our interests, comedians. We weren't interested in the pub at the time. That wasn't what we wanted to do. And so we made sure that there were DJs and not just bands. Those are my honest reflections and recollections of our time in the university there. And I'll tell you what, I ended up, as a reflection of the organization and the success that we were having, selecting me as a homecoming king. I was able to serve I was a class of 98 senator. I served as a summer RA. I worked in the Hawley Lounge in the student activity office. I was in campus ministry and going on retreats. I say that not to pat myself on the back, but it was a way to make the experience for me and for those around me better. And if I leave you with nothing else today, it wasn't to sit there and whine about what's not good. What are you doing to serve and maximize that experience and your voice to at least impact change? So that's the story that I can remember, and the experience entering in '94. And I've ultimately been thrust into leadership positions, and there is no doubt in my mind, when I left in '98, I continue to end up serving in leadership roles, even when I don't want to, because they're a whole lot of work. But I promise you that the impact of that time from '94 to '98 at Sacred Heart, with administrators listening, telling me what was possible, what they could do in 1 year, maybe in a couple, it was just being engaged and trying to serve the community. I think it impacted me for the rest of my life.
Thank you so much, for that answer. It's funny because our experience is almost like carbon copy, with me being an ex-football player, chartering a fraternity on campus as well, Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated. And to kind of stick with this, I guess, line of questioning, how has your experience, as an underrepresented student prepared you for life after college, right? And what successes have you seen, and, lessons have you learned along the way, after graduating? When '98 came, what was the next step for, at the time, I guess, young Eric Wood?
Yeah. I honestly, because of my experience at the time with Kim Souza Peoples, who's now at UNC Greensboro, but working over there with Denise and Larry, Dean Wilk, all I know was that I loved the jobs that they had. Right. And so they were working with students on a college campus. It seemed like a fun job. I wanted that experience. And because I know Sacred Heart is now Division I and FCS, but I really didn't have exposure to understand that there was a career in athletics administration. But what I learned from the way the people at Sacred Heart loved on me and showed me the way was through those relationships. They said, hey, if you want to do something like this, you typically have to pursue a master's and become a graduate assistant, and maybe in student personnel or higher ed administration. There's an idea if you want to do something like this. And, because of those relationships, because I served as an RA, because I served as a football student athlete leader on campus, not just a student athlete leader, right? I wasn't a taker. I didn't sit there and say, because I got this GE money or this scholarship, I wasn't a taker. I wanted to be a giver. Because of those relationships, those people were able to speak on my behalf. Those people wanted to mentor me. I've never approached somebody that wouldn't want to mentor you if you've built a solid relationship. And so I'll share that because of those relationships, because of the positions in the leadership, because they could serve as a reference, because they had been at other places and could share, help me decide what I wanted to do in my life. They helped me get down to Clemson University. And Robert, that alone was leaving the Bronx and Fairfield, Bridgeport area and going straight to Clemson, South Carolina. with 12,000 people and no movie theater and no mall and being on in the South for the first time in my life. I think I know the experiences during my time and leadership and living in a community that didn't all look like me, but I had a space to have an outlet, serving on these different committees, serving in leadership roles, even while, serving as a starter on the football team. Having those experiences, it forced me to work with others that didn't look like me, didn't think like me, they weren't where I was from. And it forced me to do that. And so moving down to Clemson, completely out of my realm of comfort. I, while it was a tough adjustment, I had been through a tough adjustment starting in '94 at Sacred Heart, and I worked through that. And so, getting my master's there, after that experience, I felt like I could live anywhere in the country. I could go anywhere in the country. People would often discourage me from working in areas that didn't have a high minority population. And I look at it as, well, in those places, that's probably where those student athletes need me most. So it wasn't always about my level of comfort. But because of that experience at Sacred Heart, I felt like I could tackle the world. I felt like I could try new things. I felt like I could pursue things that were a little bigger than probably what I was ready for, but that I knew that I could grow into them. And so I think that's it. I learned if I could ball all that up into two things, and for our grown folks, you probably know this already, but so I've got our students in mind. But the two things that I learned coming out of that is serve, right? If you keep the focus on other people, that doesn't mean you ignore your happiness and proximity to family and doing the thing you love. But I realize if I serve others, if I keep others' interests in mind, and that's why I think this conversation is so appropriate as we celebrate Dr. King. But if I serve others, I'm in a better space. I ultimately end up benefiting from that. And if I compete, we have to compete in everything we do. And that doesn't mean, some people don't like the word compete, right? It's all about winning. The compete I'm talking about is with our personal, who we are personally, and how we better ourselves. And oftentimes, yes, it could mean competing with others for the job. Here I am with a 770 SAT. I was determined to get a doctorate to prove that I was more than that score. Sacred Heart gave me that opportunity. I was more than that score. I wanted to make sure. So this doctorate wasn't even really about me. I wanted to, I had a chip on my shoulder, but I learned to compete. And in the master's program, in the doctorate program, at every job. And now if we're playing ping pong, I want to beat you, right? But I'm also, my first competition is with myself and being a better version of myself, being a better husband and dad and employee, and getting this place at Louisiana Tech to be the most competitive athletics department in the country. That's what I'm striving for. But my experience at Sacred Heart, working with people that were different and had different ideas, and all of that, if I could ball it up, it's serve others and compete at everything you do. That would be what I learned.
I think you might have a lane in motivational speaking, Dr. Wood. Because personally, that just motivated me. I'm currently in graduate school right now. And I said, after this, I'm done. But, after that, I might rethink that. But yeah.
What I learned, and maybe the faculty, they may fact check me here, right? But towards the end, Robert, when I was in the middle of that doctoral program, and I'm just talking to the competition part, right? I learned that something like less than 3% of the world, have a terminal degree. And I was like, okay, that's what I need. But you know what else? And as I mentioned, that usually when you accomplish great things, it was about other people. Some mentors had me write my dedication part of the dissertation before I completed the dissertation. They had me write the appreciation part so that when I wanted to quit, I remembered who it was about. It was about my mom making 35 grand in the Bronx, finding a way to help me get through the remaining portion of my financial aid package at Sacred Heart. It was about my mom sending a check for me to walk to the bursar's office. And every time I turned that check into the bursar's office at Sacred Heart, I can remember making that walk by the parking lot, if it's still there. I haven't been on campus in a little while. But I remember dropping off that check personally for the remaining balance of my aid, right? I couldn't miss class. And I would, if you want to go back and check, maybe miss 4 classes, but I couldn't miss it because it wasn't about me anymore, right? So the service piece and doing it for others. That's where that competition part came in from, and just having an appreciation for everybody that helped you get there, everybody that helped you get there. So anyway, sorry for interrupting.
No, I like I said, you're motivating me right now as as we have this exchange, and I'm hoping that students on the call are just as motivated from all backgrounds, right? To know that you can come from the Bronx or wherever, as to where it's assumed that you might not be capable of completing your 4-year degree. It is a possibility, and it is something that you can achieve or accomplish. So that's why I really wanted to highlight that. But to mention the current students on the call, what kinds of words of advice or encouragement would you give to our students of color during this time of the pandemic and this, the unrest? What words of advice would you want to give to these students at the moment?
What I would share, Robert, this was the first time I rarely got emotional during all the social unrest. The only time I got emotional was when I shared with white colleagues and friends all of the things that we do intentionally, subconsciously, the way our families may have brought us up. I'll speak personally, so I don't speak for everybody else. But it was the first time that I really articulated all of the things I do to um, make other people feel comfortable, right? And to avoid my children and our family being met with any pushback, for a lack of a better words, for lack of a better word. Um, and so it was, naming my children so they weren't, in a way that was culturally ambiguous. You may judge me for that, but I was worried about their future. All of their names were names that I thought, could they be judged if somebody saw their name on the resume? And I know a lot of things are electronic now. I know a lot of companies and HR offices will Google, and they can look you up a little bit to determine anyway. But having to do those things, worried about whether or not when I go look for a home now, dressing up when some of my other colleagues may just be in jeans and a t-shirt, because I'm afraid of the perception of the rest of the neighborhood of who's coming in. Um, Making sure that I'm dressed appropriately when I went to class, not having my hat backwards. Now, there's a professionalism that might be for everybody, but there were things that I just thought through my time at Sacred Heart, at work, that just weren't, the rules weren't for me. Um, the rules were set where I had to change. Um, and so I guess we would call that code switching. I guess we would call that just how to live in certain spaces, right? And so I would challenge our African American students to understand it. Um, I wanted to wait till I was in a leadership role, um, to express and be who I truly was, and that still gets nerve wracking. This conversation is nerve wracking, but I would challenge our students of color to understand the game, push the limits, but also let's not bring each other down, right? Let's not say that he or she is speaking white, acting white, because someone's articulate. Let's not use the N word, even if we've taken away the power of it. Let's lift each other up, right? And then I would say this was the first time that we probably also realized that LeBron James can't speak for us. It doesn't matter. Denzel Washington, I'm dating myself here, but any of these figures, it didn't matter this time around. What we were wanting were allies from our white friends and roommates and classmates and those we served on boards with and served in organizations with. And so I challenge our white students and colleagues and faculty. Hopefully, you're not upset with me on this, but just don't live in the middle. Be all in, right? Just because there's order, right? I think that's from the letters from Dr. King mentioned in the letters from Birmingham jail, right? Like the biggest stumbling block, he said, for the Negroes is not the extremists, not the KKK. It's the white moderate in the middle, in choosing a side, going all in, understanding, having the idea of not telling people to lift themselves up by their own bootstraps, of understanding where their start was and if they had boots. And so I don't want to ramble here, Robert, but I would just say, that would be my challenge to both student groups and, you know, in response to that question.
Thank you for that answer, Dr. Wood. So I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Diversity Officer, Julie Lawrence, quickly, so she can have a quick exchange with you, if that's all right.
Okay, yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, hi, Eric. Thank you so much for everything you've said. And, when I was hearing you talk about, leaving an area, moving to this Fairfield County area, I grew up in Fairfield, having been born in Bridgeport. And, that kind of multicultural currency is what I call it, that helps students such as you, such as me, such as Robert, to have a more fluid campus experience. But when we were talking about MLK quotes and the current environment and building allyship that we want to do as a university for and from and with each other, the quote that comes to mind is, "There comes a time when silence is complicity," or silence becomes betrayal. And that quote Dr. King made in the context of the Vietnam War when he came out against it. And you mentioned he was very vilified for who he was toward the end, and eventually he was assassinated. But I kind of look at that as like a two-sided coin, and I heard that from you too. What is it that we do to betray ourselves? And you touched on it. So how can students be more self-efficacious? Minoritized students, underrepresented students, they may not be Black, they may not be brown, they could be students that just feel disengaged. So you gave us a lot of really, really good advice for the students to hear. What about some of the faculty? What could the faculty do to support the student development along these lines? Also, and how can we help faculty to be less complicit? We were talking a little earlier in a meeting today about aspects of social, racial development. Folks are there, folks want to be there. There are folks that are silent, they don't know what to do, they're mute. And then there are folks that just don't agree with any of this. I want to get to those folks that are silent and mute and help them move their own learning and development. What would you recommend around that so that they're not feeling like their silence is complicity? What can they do as faculty?
I feel for faculty, because maybe as an administrator, and maybe I'm letting people off the hook, I don't know, but you know as an administrator, faculty have so many office hours, and you want to ask about every one of your students in these minoritized groups. You want to know their story, but you're figuring, how do I do this? How do I conduct research? How do I teach my classes? How do I, in a COVID world, put all of my lessons online? And maybe some of these courses were never intended to be online. And so you're struggling with, how do I do that? And it's an area of an expertise and passion for you. But the only answer I can have, that I have for that is to take the initiative. And as we said, Julie, just not live in the middle, where as long as there's peace and nobody's talking about it in my classroom, or it's not an issue at my school or in my department, to not allow that to just be the reason why you continue on. And it's if it's webinars, if it's online training, I don't mean to, hopefully that's not condescending, but it's taking the initiative to understand what you don't know. And I have colleagues and there are faculty that hate the word privilege. I mean, people are referring to me as the P word, right? Like, in conversations that I've had. And I think that's just understanding that, being intentional. If you notice something about a particular student, I mean, I think these are all things that faculty are, they intend to do anyway. It's the reason they get in the field, is to work with students, and they love education. They have a passion for young people. That's my general assumption. But Julie, I don't know how to answer it other than we can't live in the middle. We have to be all in, that everybody, that hate is not acceptable, and that being intentional about understanding if somebody has boots, before we say, to lift yourself up by your own bootstraps, or comparing it to your experience and the effort you put in. And so I don't know if that answers the question, but the way to summarize that is just not living in the middle. It's not living in that moderate space.
You're on, Julie.
I'm on. Well, thank you, Eric, and that does make a lot of sense. We are working on a lot of things in the academic affairs departments of Sacred Heart, as well as offering some upcoming training and development for employees and for students starting next month, February. So it will touch on those things: power and privilege, identities, intersectionality, and creating a culture of respect within Sacred Heart, building on that, and how can students and employees be, better allies, which I believe is our next question, is how can students be better allies? What would you have wanted from students when you were in school in terms of allyship?
Yeah, so I lived. My room on the sixth floor of West Hall was a very diverse room with my roommates. But I would have hoped. I completely understand the fear of asking a friend or colleague of color how hey I, how can I help? Like I get that. I truly do get that. But I do think people made some false assumptions based on who I am, right? Currently, and this started, I'm 3 months into this job. During my time at UCF was right in the middle of this, in that August, September timeframe. But people assumed that I didn't experience what they were watching on the news, whether they agreed with it or not. Well, you're at the time, a deputy athletics director and now a vice president. Oh, but you're so well spoken. You never get those issues. Or he dressed nice. I don't think he's from the hood, or from the, they assumed that I never experienced those things. And that's Julie where I was going for, where I got emotional, because it was the first time that I explained to them everything that I do on a daily basis to fit into their culture, to be safe, to be considered safe and not a threat, right? And to dispel any rumors of what they thought Blacks and Latinos would look like, come from, financial, socioeconomic, trying to dispel and spending all this energy on a daily basis and never talking about it. But my white colleagues and friends were understandably afraid to ask, or they made some assumptions that I never experienced those things because of what they saw. And they don't understand what it took over the last 20 years after graduating from college to even get to this point where they wouldn't notice or dare to ask. And so I would challenge you that obviously a relationship is the most important, but listening, understanding, and these are all things I know have been coming out in the during our social justice movement and all of this social unrest, was just listen and ask, but don't be afraid to ask a dumb question. And obviously a relationship is what's necessary first, but I would say don't make assumptions about people you think are not experiencing any of this unrest, and then also asking the questions you really want to know and understand.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Eric. I believe that Rob Johnson has some questions, and we may also have some questions from our audience.
Yeah, so I guess we're going to turn it over to members of the community to submit some questions into the chat for Dr. Wood. And once you submit those questions, we'll begin to ask them. And yeah, I mean, I'm really excited for what we have coming in the month ahead with Black History Month coming. And I think it's important that people understand that this is your opportunity to be able to ask these questions, right, in Black History Month during a time where we are highlighting, Black voices in the experience. That's where you can be an ally, and that's where you can understand someone else's experience. And yeah, so I just wanted to say that quickly before we moved on. Yep.
Let me share that in this current position. Not only is it the first time an athletics director had a vice president title, but I'm the first African American, the first person of color to hold a vice president title at Louisiana Tech. I promise you, if you don't know me, you think I'm bragging. What I'm sharing is that burden while it's celebrated and I'm honored, I don't think people understand that I feel like it's no one else's fault, but I feel like I carry the banner for the entire race every time I come to work, right? And so I'm honoring the people that came before me that didn't quite make it to vice president. They were a dean of a dean of here we have a dean of a student advancement and a dean of multicultural affairs, and they didn't quite get there, right? And they're cheering for me and they're excited, and I know I stand on their shoulders and other folks' shoulders around the country. But there's just an understanding of being the vice president is hard enough. Being the director of athletics is hard enough. There's just an inherent feeling that people don't understand now, of that I walk around feeling like if I don't do well, another person of color will never get a chance. And I that's nobody's fault, but it's just the feeling we bring to work every day. And just sharing that transparent thought of, I don't know if others know that or would know that, but we're talking amongst family right now. So I just figured I'd share that so that if you weren't in that people group, you might understand what we're walking through. And there's no victim mentality here. Just trying to be transparent and what it feels like in my shoes every day.
Thank you. What I want to do next is, again, I want to, just submit a call to action to the university from my perspective, working in the multicultural center. This is a brand new thing on campus, right? We've been open since September, and I just really want everyone to know that this is the place where you can come to learn and have a cultural exchange without feeling a sense of, I don't know, people being defensive or thinking that you're making assumptions, right? I really just want to let the community know, yes, you can come and ask me questions about what the experience of, being a Black male is, right? Or a Black woman, right? So, or anything in between. I really want the university and the community to understand that it is okay to ask those dumb questions, and that, Dr. P and Julie and everyone that's, been a part of, pushing the needle forward in creating, an inclusive cultural environment for our community, please take advantage of that. So I don't think we have anything else. I think we're closing in on 3:00. I just wanted to give you the opportunity to say some lasting words, Dr. Wood, if you have any. So.
Well, again, I'm honored. I think uh, the fact that this is a full circle opportunity for me. I never thought I'd have an opportunity to serve on a board of trustees at my alma mater. I think my overall record was good there, but I had the adversity that just about all of you have faced. Student athletes, probably students and student athletes, and and try to do everything the right way. But I'll tell you what, there's a reason why I'm still in touch with Dean Wilk. There's a reason I'm still in touch with Denise. There's a reason Coach Nof and he was my position coach, and now he's living his dream as a head coach. There's a reason that all of us maintain these relationships. And I'll remind our faculty, I'll remind our staff of the old adage, and I believe it was Maya Angelou, but you can, maybe I'm misquoting that, of the old adage that people may forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And so, serving other people, competing to be the best version of yourself, doing something that's bigger than yourself. And that's, you may not want to take on the leadership role. You may not want to do things outside. You may be a football student athlete watching and you're like, I don't have time for anything else or any other sport. But find ways to grow, find ways to stretch yourself, and you'll never return to that original form. And so I just know that usually when the activity, the job, the task is bigger than you're ready for, not ready for, but bigger than you probably think you're ready for, you have an opportunity to grow. And so I look forward to serving my institution. I look forward to serving our community here locally and in New York and at Sacred Heart, and can't wait to get back on campus. And thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Wood. Thank you, Julie, President Patillo.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, everybody on the call, those supporting, and remembering Dr. King, and highlighting the experience and seeing what you can become. Right, you can become a member of the board of trustees. You can become educated. You just can. I want you all to understand that. Yes, I thank everybody today for the support. We've heard a lot of quotes today, and I want to leave you all with this, just to ask yourselves this question, what are you doing at the individual level to make sure that, Dr. King's, messages and his sacrifice has not gone to waste, and that, you're creating a space or an environment as to where people can feel included and feel, not feel like they're being dismissed or anything that they're experiencing doesn't matter. So I thank you all, and I bid you all farewell.
Dr. Patillo, thank you for your leadership. You fired me up to get back involved. And so however you can use me to serve our students and our faculty and staff, I'm wide open to it. But I got fired up by your boldness and courageous statement, knowing you were going to get torn up for it. I appreciate your boldness, and it fired me up to get back involved. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you for joining today's conversation. To learn more, visit sacredheart.edu.